Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We're happy to have you here this afternoon on our mini lecture on the myths of leadership. My name is Michael McGurl. I'll be our host this afternoon. I serve as the admissions coordinator for our online programs, specifically our Masters in Management, our online Masters in Organizational Leadership, and our online Masters in Business Analytics. And I'm also working with our online Masters in Data Science program as well. Our wonderful lecturer this afternoon is going to be Professor Robin Rose, who is an associate professor and professor as a practice of leadership at the School of Professional Studies. So Robin is going to take us through our lecture this afternoon on the myth of leadership. At the end, we're going to briefly go over some application information if you are interested in any of our online master's programs. Afterwards, we'll have a live Q&A where you can ask Professor Robin Rose any questions you might have about her lecture. So you can use the Q&A function at the end of that. If Robin has kind of questions for the audience throughout, please feel free to use the chat feature if you want to respond to those. Otherwise, Robin, we're going to pass it over to you and we're going to get started.
Great. Glad to be here, and always grateful for the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is leadership. And that has been a long-standing fascination. I've been at Brown for 44 years and worked in several senior leadership positions, which were great learning laboratories. You know, it's one thing to read about leadership, it's another thing to need to show up as an effective leader. And one of the things that I'm particularly curious about is sort of what is the mythology? What's the narrative? What are the stories that we tell ourselves and are told to us about what makes for effective leadership? I mean, if you go online and look for books on leadership, there are literally hundreds, probably thousands at this point, of books on leadership. And it's really hard to figure out, like, what is your style? How do you thread the needle? How do you think about influencing other people? One thing I should say from the start is that when I think about leadership and authority are two different things. Sometimes they come together, sometimes not. So often we think of the people who are leaders are people who are in positions of authority. Yes and no. And the reality is that I like to think about leadership as leadership is the process of influencing others. And so you might not be in a position of authority, but that doesn't mean that you can't have impact. It doesn't mean that you can't have influence. You have it differently. You exert it differently than necessarily people in positions of authority. So if you're sitting listening to this and thinking, well, I'm really not quite a leader yet or whatever, think again, because even in situations where you don't have authority to direct other people, you certainly have some influence. Yeah, and I like to think about what are some of the cultural myths that we've been told or that we're surrounded by in this country about what makes for effective leadership? And I think I want to start by asking that question and see if any of you would be so willing, so bold to put in the chat. What are some of the narratives that you have heard or experienced about who is a leader and what is expected of leaders? And I'm just going to sit in silence here for a minute and give you a chance to think and write in the chat. Decisive. Yeah, absolutely. Um, how about some more thoughts? What do we think? Is it? Please try again. Sorry. Authenticity and honesty. Hi, Sandy. Um, Trustworthy. That's always helpful. Ethical. Yep. Sorry, something went wrong. Something is wrong with my phone. Excuse me. I'm sorry. It's really interfering here. Um, Let me ask this question. Leaders are great listeners. We would hope. We would absolutely hope, but not always so. Thanks, Hannah. Traditionally, who gets to be leaders? Traditionally, who gets to be leaders? Extroverts. Yeah, absolutely. We think of leaders as these folks who are charismatic, who are um, extroverted, who are comfortable speaking in front of large groups, individuals who've demonstrated respect from their peers. Yep. Who else? Those who are persuasive, zest and confidence. Yep. Yeah. And so sometimes some of these definitions leave out a bunch of people, right? And so often I work with young people, everybody looks young to me now, middle-aged people who are not extroverted, who are not necessarily comfortable up front, and they don't see themselves as leaders. But the reality is that we need people with all kinds of personalities and all kinds of backgrounds to step up to be leaders. Historically, women were left out of the picture, introverts were left out of the picture, people of color were left out of the picture. It was leadership positions were pretty much dominated by men and by white men in particular. That is changing. We still have some more work to do there to be more inclusive, not just of gender and background, but also of styles, right? So we're trying to break up some of the myths and traditional expectations around leadership. What are some other myths that narratives around leadership? And I'll give you a prompt. Leaders must always what? Fill in the blank in the chat. Leaders must always fill in the blank. Open to suggestions, right? What else? Leaders must always be I've practiced Quakerism in the past, so I can sit with silence a long time. Build consensus, take responsibility for the good and the bad. Yeah. Oftentimes, there's an implicit or explicit expectation that leaders must always have the answers. Leaders must be decisive. Leaders must always provide direction. Um, and I wonder what kind of pressure that puts on individual leaders if they feel like they always have to have the answer or that they must always inspire others. Thank you, Rachel. What kind of pressure does that put on the individual? Pretty tough. Pretty tough. And I think people who are younger in their careers often feel like they have to have the answers all the time, otherwise they will not be perceived as credible. Right? I'm not saying this to discount that people are looking to leaders for direction and answers. But I often think that leaders most often leaders need to be facilitators. People who get the input are able to pull out the input and perspective and ideas from other people in order to as a group, come up with an answer, a strategy, a direction. What I know about leadership is that the more complex the problems are, the more we need input from a variety of people from diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences. The more, I'll say that again, the more complexity there is in what the group or the organization or the company is trying to do, the more the group or the organization benefits from diverse perspectives and diverse skills and diverse backgrounds, right? And it's the responsibility of the leader or the person in authority to like facilitate that and bring that out in people. That doesn't mean that, it's never appropriate to give direction and to offer an answer, give an answer. But I think that there is the complexity of what leaders are dealing with, leadership is dealing with right now, is enormous. Technologically, socially, politically, organizationally, you name it. And so the old command and control, as a leader, I come up with the idea and then I tell you what you're going to do, just isn't working the way that it used to. Maybe it never really worked, but certainly not in this complexity. So we need to think about like what skills do leaders need in order to bring out the best and the most in the people with whom they are working. What kind of skills do people need in order to provide that kind of leadership? Go ahead and put some ideas in the chat. Open communication. Somebody talked about listening before. Yep. Acknowledging other people's strengths. What other skills do leaders need? Ability to work with diverse audiences. Yep. Foster collaborative and admit when they're wrong. Transparency. What makes that important? The ability and the willingness to admit when you're wrong. In what way is that important to a group or an organization? Fosters trust, transparency. Because if I, as a leader, am willing to acknowledge when I don't know the answer or when I've made a mistake, what impact? It shows flexibility, shows that it reminds us all that we're human and make mistakes. Absolutely, Rachel. Okay. If we want to build an environment that is psychologically safe, a place where it's okay for people to admit they don't know or that they've made a mistake, it really starts with the leadership also being willing to say, you know what, I don't know. We're going to need to figure that out, or we're going to have to find that answer, or I will find an answer and get back to you. All right. Because when you think about it, what happens in an organization when it is not safe to admit a mistake or to acknowledge that you don't know? What happens in those organizations where it's not safe to do those things? High turnover. Yeah. Sometimes if if a leader does not want to know the bad news or the things that they want to avoid, while people hide from difficult conversations, there's a lack of honesty and transparency. Yeah. Chokehold collaboration. Oh, Mondi, I want to hear more about what you mean by chokehold collaboration, if you wouldn't mind typing another thought in the chat there. I think that transparency and vulnerability, that's another myth, isn't it, around leadership sometimes, that it's not okay for people in leadership roles to admit they're vulnerable or that they don't know an answer or that they need help. And when that happens, it sets a tone for everybody else. So, Mondi, thank you. Chokehold collaboration is when people are afraid to make mistakes, they won't explore their way to solutions. Yeah, that's pretty deadly. That's pretty deadly. So there's this cultural narrative sometimes about leaders having to have all the answers and not being vulnerable. There's another sort of myth around leadership, I think, which is related, which is that leaders need to be able or willing to fix everything. What is that about? What is the impulse? Not just, I suppose, not just limited to leaders, but let's say there's a colleague of yours who's telling you about a difficult situation that they're dealing with, And our typical response is to do what? We have a colleague who is needing some help with maybe with a piece of work or project they're working on, whatever. What's our first impulse? Go ask the boss. Thanks, Sandy. Mondi says, offer an answer. Okay, why? It provides solutions. Jump in. Yeah. And sometimes that's totally appropriate. Maybe it's because it's appropriate because you have a lot of experience in the area that they're working in, and you can possibly mentor them or give them some advice or an answer. What's the downside of that? If a colleague comes to you, a person comes to you and they're having trouble with a project or a situation, what's the downside of you frequently, maybe always, giving them the answer? They don't figure out how to answer or think about their own solutions. That's right. That builds a dependency that in the long run does not serve the organization well. Yeah. And why do we go immediately? Yeah, they aren't learning to navigate through difficult issues. They will feel unqualified, et cetera, et cetera. Let's think about our own impulses for just a second. When somebody tells you a problem, it could be at work or in your personal life, the impulse to give them a solution right away, what drives that? Why do we want to fix so quickly? We're empathetic and we want to help, sure. Sometimes we want to fix it quickly because we're uncomfortable. Maybe it's because we believe that leaders should always be problem solvers. Let me challenge that belief a little bit. One of the things that I spend a lot of time doing is teaching coaching skills to leaders and also helping people become certified executive coaches. And one of the things we talk about is that the impulse to fix, sometimes we're in a hurry, sometimes we think that's our job, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of times it's because we're uncomfortable with the other person's discomfort or the other person's ambiguity in the situation. Our brains don't like uncertainty and ambiguity. And so when we're faced with a problem, whether it's our problem or somebody else's, almost always our first impulse is to want to fix it so we can move on to a more comfortable place where we can return to sort of homeostasis, where we can feel better. There's a lot of reinforcement, right? When we give somebody advice and we give them a solution or some direction, um, it makes us feel better. I think we get kind of a shot of dopamine that like, oh yeah, I'm a helper and I was able to fix that. That's all great with one exception. Two exceptions. One is we might actually not know what we're doing and we might actually not have the answer to give to another person. And secondly, as leaders, one of our most important responsibilities is to develop the professionalism, the competency and confidence of other people, not just ourselves, of other people. And if we're always giving or frequently giving people direction and answers, how helpful is that really to that person in terms of developing their competency and their confidence? What do you think about that? Share some thoughts here in the chat. It's not helpful. It's counterproductive. Yeah, other thoughts. When we're always giving the answers, what impact does it have on developing other staff, other people? Yeah, it could feel like micromanaging. When I look back on my career, which is not finished, by the way, but I am done with being in senior administrative roles. It's not good for the long-term aims for the organization to foster. Yeah, actually, I'm liking what I'm seeing in the chat here. They become more dependent. The span of support is critical for job design, but may conflict with other span of influence. Yes, yes to all these things. When I look back on my career, a question that I wish that I had asked more frequently, I asked it frequently, but I wish I'd asked it even more frequently, is a very simple question. What do you think? What do you think? Because in fact, I want to encourage the thinking and problem solving of other people, individuals, other individuals, or groups. And it's not that I'm going to absent myself from having an opinion or giving direction, but if I want to develop other people's competency and confidence, I need to know what their thinking process is. I did a lot of crisis management in my career, and it was really easy to fall into the trap of I was good at it, and so it was really easy to fall into the trap of giving answers. And at some point along the line, I realized that it was really important to get other people to exercise their brain power to come up with solutions themselves. Yeah, Mondi, you have an excellent point. It's easier to fix other people's problems and much harder to strengthen I would say, their own or our own problem-solving muscles. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Are there other myths that you have noticed yourself subscribing to or other people subscribing to? Let me offer a couple more and see if they fit your experience. Um, I think a belief system or myth that some leaders subscribe to is I have to make everybody happy. It's kind of a deadly one, isn't it? All of us want to be liked. I mean, I don't think anybody gets up in the morning and says to themselves, "Gee, I hope that I can really irritate as many people as possible today." We like to be liked, but it's oftentimes, it's not possible to make decisions and solve problems in ways that makes everybody feel okay, that makes everybody feel happy. I remember as a 39-year-old when I was appointed as the chief student affairs position at Brown, I had moved over. I had been a psychotherapist in the counseling center, and everybody likes I mean, pretty much everybody likes their psychotherapist, right? So I move into the senior position where our staff and I were making decisions every day about student conduct issues, issues related to sexual assault, harassment, discrimination, um, but just bad behavior on campus, putting students out on medical leave sometimes, even if they didn't want to, et cetera, et cetera. There was not a day, I don't think there was a day that went by that I um, didn't have either a faculty, a parent, a student, or another staff member mad at me. And I realized about 6 months into it that if I didn't figure out a different way to talk to myself, a different narrative, that if I didn't like figure out how not to buy into this myth of my job was to make everybody happy, I was going to fail at this job and I was going to drive myself bananas. Uh, So for me, that myth, that belief that I needed to make everybody happy had to get transformed. And the way that got transformed for me with the help of a coach was, okay, as long as I can believe that I've been fair by my own standards, that I have listened to people, that I've considered multiple perspectives, and that I've given it careful thought, not obsessional thought, but careful thought, then I could go to bed at night and tolerate the fact that there were people who were extremely angry with me over any particular decision. Make sense? So if you're having a hard time as a leader making a decision, you might ask yourself, what am I telling myself that is making this so difficult? And maybe somewhere buried in there is this belief system that oh, I've got to find a solution that makes everybody happy. Not usually possible. Another myth, and then maybe we'll stop and try to get a little more dialogue going on here. Hang on, I want to read what Hannah said. Oftentimes, the right decision might not be the popular. Amen, amen. I just had to talk to one of my team members about this very thing yesterday after a hard performance. Yes, yeah. So it's something that not only you need to work on, you may decide you need to work on, not making everybody happy, but you may need to help other people with that as well. Another one more myth that is fairly common is this one. It's like if I don't do it myself, it's not going to be done right. Does that resonate with anybody out there? If I don't do it myself, it's not going to be done right. Or a corollary is, everybody is way too busy and, I'll just take it on myself. I'll just take it on myself because I don't want to put anybody else out and they're already working really hard. Let's take the first one. Um, I have to do it myself or it won't be done right. Whew. In my experience, that's one of those narratives that leads to burnout pretty quickly. Um, yeah. And I know that it takes a lot of self-management to delegate to other people. We feel as leaders, we often feel an enormous sense of responsibility for the outcome, for the quality of the work of our organizations. And the reality is, if we keep all the work to ourselves, one, we don't develop other people. Two, we burn ourselves out, and then we're of no use to the organization. And three, we have to figure out how to delegate. Delegation isn't just one size fits all, that you just hand everything over and goodbye, good luck, tell me how it's going in a month or whatever. Delegation has to be calibrated to the capacity, the competency, and the confidence of other people. You all know that there are some people in your organization you could ask them to do anything and they do it really well. And other people you need to be in a little bit closer, you need to calibrate but differently, you need to support them differently. Um, there was a second point I wanted to make and I just lost it. Here's a comment from Jesse. In a previous role, that this is what I experienced with a leader now leading my own team. I have the view that everyone on my team has the right to offer suggestions and solutions. And good for you, Jesse. I have one of the most productive teams for the organization. Okay, some really good thoughts here. Um, yeah, I think we realize as leaders that delegation comes in increments and looks differently for different people and looks different depending on the consequences of the outcome of a project or an intervention or an initiative, um, that really helps us to calibrate our delegation. I'm wondering, I think there's one more myth I'll throw out. So we've got the myth of I have to have the answers, the myth of I can't be vulnerable, the myth of I have to make everybody happy, the myth of either I do it or it's not going to be good, or I have to be in control of everything. And I think sometimes there's one more myth, which is I have to be the smartest person in the room or I won't be taken seriously. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes there's enormous pressure, especially if you're young in your career. There's certainly a felt pressure that, boy, I got to strut my stuff. I've got to show up and convince everybody that I am smart enough and capable and experienced enough to do this job. That creates a lot of pressure to be perfect. And guess what? Last time I looked, none of us are perfect. Um, I think one of the things that's helpful if you're feeling like you have to prove yourself in a big way every day is to find mentors, to find people who can support you, so that you don't feel quite so intimidated and overwhelmed. I certainly, in my first senior position at Brown, felt very overwhelmed, felt like I had to prove myself. I was one of 3 or 4 women out of 25 people. I was by far the youngest person in the room. Um, And so I felt, the pressure was real. But finding mentors, actually people who were not part of that senior leadership team around the president's table, who could help me, was really, really important. Um, all right. Would you say that delegation and accountability go hand in hand? Absolutely, Monday. Great question. When you delegate, it's not like we're washing our hands and sending people out to do the work without any support. And the amount of support we give is dependent on their skill level and their confidence level. How about other questions, other thoughts that maybe I've stimulated in this last 30 minutes? Other perspectives on leadership? One of the things that will happen in all of these programs, online programs that are about management and leadership, is that you're going to be talking about these issues. You're going to be interacting with each other and with your faculty around these issues and so many, many other areas that are related to leadership. Other questions or comments? How does one differ between leading, coaching, and mentoring? Great question, Victor. Hmm. I can definitely tell you that what I think the difference is between coaching and mentoring. Um, Mentoring is really about giving advice, giving solutions, talking about your own experience as a way of sort of mentoring a person with less experience. Um, it's often more self-referential, and that isn't a bad thing. Um, it's often focused on the problem and problem solving. When I think about coaching, it's much more focused on the person and the person's relationship to the topic or the problem. When I'm coaching somebody, I'm really careful to not talk about my experience. I'm really focused on asking them about what are their goals, what are they trying to achieve, how are they feeling about their role, what's scary, what are they telling themselves, who are their resource people who can help them. Lots of open-ended questions, lots and lots of listening. And I think leadership is a combination of a lot of things. It is teaching skills sometimes. It is mentoring and sharing your experience sometimes. It is directing people in their effort and telling them sometimes exactly what needs to happen. It's coaching. It's a wide range. And one of the challenges of leadership is that we all have our default that we go to, and I think as leaders, we're always, and I include myself, even at age 72, always looking to make sure that I am using the full range of my capacity to help other people and to serve the organization that I'm trying to serve. Um, let's see, how do a leader judge himself or herself? Wow, oftentimes we judge ourselves too harshly. Um, I think one of the most effective ways to judge ourselves is by asking for feedback. And that's hard because a lot of people are a little intimidated to give, if you're also an authority figure, to give that leader, authority figure direct feedback because they're a little nervous about, what consequences are there. Um, I think 360 tools can be very, very helpful. Um, Jesse asks, over the years in your leadership experience, what is something challenging that consistently arises no matter the organization? Oh boy, there are a lot of things. I think one of the hardest things is to truly listen to people, especially when I have a strong opinion about something. Okay, the more passionate we are about our point of view, the more strongly we hold an opinion, the harder it is to listen patiently to the input and opinions of other people. I can think of times in my career when I did not listen and it cost me. Like I can think of times when um, I was getting input from people and they were being highly critical um, of sort of the approach that we were taking as a group. And because I was tired, I didn't hear them. And looking back at it, I wish I had. So, so one of the things I've learned is even when we're really tired, sometimes it means we need to take a break and come back to the discussion. But sometimes the people we need to listen to the most are the people who are oftentimes critical. It's like the book, The Team of Rivals, that Lincoln put together, this team of people who had been very critical of him. Does a leader emerge under a crisis? I'll take this and then I'm going to stop and let Mike and others talk a little bit about the programs that you're interested. Does a leader emerge under a crisis? I think yes, sometimes, and sometimes no. Um, but I think some of the most critical skills in a crisis, sometimes we get pulled into thinking that everything is really urgent, and then we stop listening to other people and we stop thinking carefully about what we're doing. So in a crisis, I think we always have to balance our sense of urgency or other people's sense of urgency with careful thought. Yes, Jackson, matrix analysis. Um, so I think I'll stop there unless there's any other burning question. Isn't it interesting to think about leadership? It's such a complex process. But I want to make sure that Mike has time to talk about the programs, and I'm going to stay on. And if there's time at the end, I'm happy to take some more questions. So, Michael.
Wonderful, Robin. Thank you so much. I mean, really insightful information here on leadership and a great back and forth, great questions in the chat. I know I've learned a lot just sitting and absorbing all this. So thank you all so much. We are going to have some time here at the end too. If you had any other lingering questions or comments, we'll certainly have an opportunity at the end to pick Robin's brain some more. I did want to touch base on our first, our master's in management program and our master's in organizational leadership, both of our online programs. Our program format for both of these programs, they are 100% online and conducted asynchronously. Both programs offer weekly optional synchronous sessions. And both programs are 14 consecutive semesters, four consecutive semesters over 16 total months. There is an optional 3-day in-person session for both of these programs. It's an opportunity for you to meet some of your peers and faculty in person. It is 8 total courses, and we do offer merit scholarships up to 50% available for both of these online programs. Please note that, again, these are merit scholarships, not need-based, and there is a limited amount of scholarships to give out. Our Master's in Management curriculum, just to give you an idea of the courses you're going to be taking, you'll see we're covering things like the foundation of management and leadership, so a lot of what we were talking about this afternoon, marketing management. You'll see here we have courses on business analytics and decision making, supply chains and management, so really trying to take all that data and how do you make informed decisions as a leader. The application process for this program, we do require a bachelor's degree from an accredited institution. And with this program, applicants, if you're in the final semester of a bachelor's program, you are able to apply for this program. We just would need a final transcript upon the completion of your degree and before admission to the program. This program, we're asking for you to submit your resume. We're really looking for folks with 0 to 5 years for a master's in management program. So if you're, again, someone who's coming right out of college or has just shortly left college and you're in kind of one of your first professional roles, this is a really great program for you. We do require three letters of recommendation. Ideally, you can get those from former faculty members, current supervisors, or folks you work with. We do ask for a personal statement, and we really want that personal statement to touch on how this program is going to help you in the short and long term of your career, and also why Brown, why now, why is this the program that works for you? I mentioned you're going to need transcripts from all colleges and universities that you have attended. Students who are applying to this program internationally, please note that we do require West, Spantran, or ECE to evaluate those transcripts in order to apply to the program. There is a $100 application fee, but we will have that waived for any student who has attended this webinar this afternoon. And again, our international students, if English is not your native language, we do ask that you submit the TOEFL or IELTS score as well. Our Master's in Organizational Leadership program, and again, just to show you some of the courses you're going to be taking here, again, things like Foundations of Management and Leadership, Team Leadership and Collaboration, Politics, Power, and Negotiation. And this program does feature a capstone project of developing executive leadership. And a lot of students, this program is designed around the work that you're currently doing. The application process for our Master's in Organizational Leadership project, we are requiring a bachelor's degree from an accredited institution. A minimum of 3 years of professional experience is required. So organizational leadership is developed around folks who have kind of been working for a little bit. So again, if you're kind of early in your career, we definitely suggest maybe our Master's in Management. Whereas if you're kind of mid or later career, certainly our Master's in Organizational Leadership might be more what you're looking for. Similarly, we're going to ask for three letters of recommendation. Again, that can be things like current supervisors, folks you work with, again, former faculty members who maybe speak to your academic experience. Personal statement, that's going to cover things like your short and long-term goals and how this program would play into that. In addition to, again, why Brown, why now, why is this program for you? Or again, you're going to need your transcripts from all colleges and universities for international students. Same thing. West Spantran or ECE will be required for that. Application fee would be waived for attending this program if you've not already applied. And again, an IELTS, TOEFL exam for folks whose native language is not English. Important dates for these programs. You'll see our final application deadline is coming up on October 15th. So if you are looking to get into our inaugural cohort here with our spring 2026 class, we encourage you to apply as soon as you can because that deadline will be here before you know it. And then the semester begins on January 21st. Our fall application will open on October 15th, and our early action deadline will be March 15th. And again, you'll see our priority deadline of May 15th, final deadline being June 15th. That semester for fall starts September 3rd. And again, if anyone has any other questions that they wanted to run by Robin or kind of put in our Q&A or our chat, I'm going to encourage you to do that now.
There's a question, Mike, about the cohort size for master
Yeah,
cohort.
so we don't have a necessarily specific number. These are our inaugural classes. We're anticipating in the low to mid 20s for our cohorts for these programs. Again, that's going to really be determined by our applicant pool for our inaugural cohort size. But again, ideally, we're planning for in our low to mid 20s. Robin, I see a question in here that had come in the Q&A function earlier during the presentation. It says, from a
Oh,
job design optimization perspective, how does the concept of leadership affect the appropriate collaboration of spans of support, influence, and accountability?
that is a big question. How does the concept of leadership affect the appropriate calibration spans of support? Well, leadership is an important element of, so the question here has to do with job design. And I'm assuming, like, how do you design an organizational structure that is, quote, optimal? And that I think relates to some of the things that we talked about, or I talked about earlier, because it has to address the question of, is there enough support? Is there enough accountability? Um, is there enough experience, as you're designing an organization or doing a reorganization? These are really important questions in terms of, is there enough support? Who has influence and how? How are people going to be held accountable? And ultimately, who has accountability slash control? So leadership, the question of how do we provide all of these things to groups of people and to an entire organization, those are critical questions as it relates to leadership. And then Jackson has a couple other questions behind a tightly calibrated and X-tested design that aligns to how does the human factor fit in for a future with AI enablement? Wow. I am going to pass on that question because I don't yet know enough. I'm learning about AI and the impact on leadership, but I don't feel like I have enough expertise on that one to have a really thoughtful comment there. How can mindfulness plug into leadership and help out? Oh, mindfulness can be a huge part of keeping yourself healthy and also keeping yourself as effective as possible in a leadership role. Mindfulness helps all of us think about what's happening for me right now, mentally, cognitively, emotionally, physically, and how can I keep myself grounded in such a way that I bring my best thinking processes to the work I'm trying to do. So let me give you an example. If you're trying to lead in a time of high complexity or in a crisis situation, high stress situation, the more anxious we are about the outcome, um, the more that anxiety begins to interfere with our ability to think carefully and respond appropriately. So mindfulness is a huge part of leadership. Crate versus servant leadership, etc., thrive in various roles. You know, I'm not a big fan of the concept of trait leadership, and the reason for that is that uh, the trait leadership theory was based on the idea if we can just study people who are particularly effective in leadership and identify their characteristics, then we can identify young people, who are coming up as people who have great potential as leaders. And I think that the idea of identifying traits as a way of identifying leaders is really confining and excludes a lot of people. So it's not a leadership theory that I'm comfortable with. Servant leadership, that's a different thing. And my favorite leadership theory is actually adaptive leadership. If you're interested in that, read Ron Heifetz out of Harvard. And then this last question from Andrew is about grading. I'm going to bounce that back to Mike.
Yeah, students will need a B or higher in the courses that they take in our master's program. All right, folks, just want to see if there's any other last questions before we wrap up here for Robin.
It was great opportunity. I love the opportunity to chat with all of you. And I sure hope that you come to Brown.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robin. I mean, really, again, truly insightful look at some of the myths of leadership here. Just want to make sure everyone knows if you did have any additional questions about the admissions process or about today's presentation, please feel free to email us at onlinemasters_admissions at brown.edu. You can make an appointment with your graduate recruitment coordinator and you can apply today. Again, that deadline being October 15th for our for our spring application. application, and the fall application opens on October 15th. So thank you all again for attending this afternoon. Thank you again, Robin, for all your insightful looks at leadership. If you haven't already, we hope to see your application come through for our programs, and you all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.